Hi, in this video, I'm going to talk to you about itemized rating scales. Itemized rating scales are the most widely used type of scale. These are your typical 1 to 5, strongly disagree, strongly agree type scales you see in questionnaires all the time. They come in various forms. They could either be a Likert type scale, they could be semantic differential, or staple scale. Amongst these, Likert type scales and semantic differential are the most widely seen scales. What I'll be talking about here is some of the different considerations in making the choice to use itemized rating scales. As I noted, itemized rating scales come in many shapes and forms. And it is important to then bear in mind the variations and the benefits and drawbacks of each one of these variations. Let me begin by talking about here some of those variations. They pertain to scale points, whether to use a 5-point scale, a 7-point scale, or even whether to have a midpoint for the scale or not. Balanced or unbalanced refers to whether you have an equal number of positive and negative scale points. Scale anchors pertains to the labels used for the scale anchors. Do you want to call them strongly disagree, or just use a number like -2, or have no labels at all? The statements as such have some variations as well. And finally, the variations on layout as well. I'm going to take you through I'm going to build a survey out in Qualtrics here to illustrate each one of these issues. So I have just started a fresh project that I'm going to share with you right now in Qualtrics. So I'm going to call this project Itemized Rating Scales. And what I'm going to do here is, to give some context, I'm going to use a few existing surveys, existing scales. In general, it is always best to use something that exists than reinvent the wheel. So if there is a well-established scale that has been studied for reliability and validity, you're better off making use of that scale rather than coming up with your own scale. So I'm going to copy paste some stuff here I have kept elsewhere into my view. I'll change the scale type here to a text graphic. And here I'm going to paste in that information. Didn't quite paste correctly. Just delete this. Okay, so I'm going to go to Rich Content Editor and paste it there. There we go. Okay. So within Rich Content Editor, you can do a lot of your common editing tasks, like converting stuff to boldface and so on. You can do it there. Okay. But let me give context about what we're trying to accomplish here. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to, I'm going to highlight a couple of the issues or choices one makes in itemized rating surveys or scales. That's scales. And I'm going to illustrate these points through the use of two well-established or published scales. One is a battery of items on attitude towards green products. The other one is on store atmosphere. The first one is taken from an article by Matthias and Wanneberger that appeared in Journal of Advertising. The other one by Dagger and Danaher that appeared in Journal of Marketing. Okay. So the first one is a 4-item scale. The second one a 5-item scale. They were both meant to be scored on a disagree, agree, Likert scale. Okay. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to illustrate each one of these issues. Let me label the blocks so we know once we're done with this what each thing everything means. Our first block is going to be called it's going to highlight scale points issues, specifically scale points numbers. So I'll call it scale points numbers. And in here, I'll paste in the items from attitude towards green products. A new question here. New question type is going to be a matrix style question. And I'll paste in the items here from above. Make the scale a little, make some more room here. And now I'll make this to be a disagree agree scale that looks like as follows. There we have it. Please indicate your agreement each of the following statements on products. Okay, there we have it. Now, above this, I'm going to point out, again, what we're going to be illustrating out here. This is an example of scale points, numbers. And we have here a 5-point scale. Okay. Okay. So this is a 5-point scale that we are establishing out here. Okay. And so it's 5-point, as you can see, we're going from strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, neither agree nor disagree, somewhat agree, strongly agree. Now, here's a variation on this based on number of points. You can either have this as being 5 points, or let's make a copy of this question. And in this new question, we're going to make this to be 7 points. Right now, it's, again, 5 points. This could just easily be 7 points. The benefit of working through Qualtrics is the scale points adapts quite beautifully to increasing number of scale points. Now your anchors actually make sense. Let's take a look at the scale, see what it looks like. So here we have it. I like green products. I feel positive towards green products, so on. And now our scale is not 5 points, but 7 points. You might wonder, or maybe you already have an opinion about this. Is this, 5 points or 7 points? Let me correct this notation, this error here. Is which one is better? Your 5-point, the one above, or a 7-point? Now, it's a difficult question to answer. The norm is to use either 5 or 7 points, so either one is correct. The trade-off here is that the more scale points you have, if you go have, let's say, 9, 11, or 13 points, the scale will be more cognitively challenging for the respondent. Having to choose from 7, 9, 11 points is far more challenging or demanding. Fewer items, fewer scale points makes the choice task for the respondent easier. They'll get to the questionnaire quicker. They'll be happier. Now, the flip side is, if you have more scale points, you can get more granular responses. You give respondents more opportunity to choose a number between two numbers, like choosing something between strongly disagree and somewhat disagree. And this might get you more granular responses and might better reflect the respondent's true feelings about the issue at hand. Furthermore, it tends to be that all else being equal, if you give somebody more scale points, you get more variance in your data. More variance, generally speaking, is desirable in a survey. You always want to get variation, because with variation, your analysis will, generally speaking, be more enlightening. Okay. So we have a little bit of trade-off here. More scale points, good for the statistician, bad for the respondent. Fewer scale points, good for the respondent because they'll get through the questionnaire really fast and they're happier because it's easier to answer. Bad for the statistician because there's, generally speaking, going to be less variance in your data. Well, let's just throw in one more here, the things you don't want to do. So what if you want to go down to 3-point scale? Well, let's try hitting this button 5 and hitting it again. Qualtrics won't let me go down to 3-point scale. There's no default built in for 3-point scale. So the only way for me to do that is to manually delete some of these options here. So I'll remove the somewhat options, and this will then give me a 3-point scale. There we have 3-point scale. So as I noted before, this might be easy to answer for a respondent, but for a statistician, this may not be a desirable desirable scale to use. Okay, let me go on to another kind of scale out here. I'll go on to this time. I'll call this, let me copy the whole block over, actually, it'll be easier for me. So I'll copy this block over. I'll call this new block scale points odd or even? Here's a new block. Modify the scale points, call this first one to be odd. It tends to be that we tend to see a lot of scale points, scales that have an odd number of points in them. Seems like the default in many cases. It doesn't have to be though. Let's see what the alternative is. So odd is your a 5-point scale. You could also have an even, which is 6 points. Here's how to make a 6-point scale. We'll step on the number of scale points, make that 7. And then we're going to go in and take away the middle option. So now that's gone. Here we have now, let's preview this. Notice in this scale, we're asking people to agree or disagree on this for each one of these statements. And the scale anchors are strongly disagree, disagree, somewhat disagree, somewhat agree, agree, strongly agree. You may have already picked up on the fact that the middle option is missing. Oftentimes when you give somebody a choice to make, many people would rather not make the choice. They'd rather straddle the fence. What this ensures is that people don't straddle the fence by taking away the middle option. So which one is better? Odd or even? All else being equal. Well, the norm is to have an odd point scale. Having 5 point, 7 point is the norm. I don't often see a lot of even point scales like a 4 point or 6 point. But I can see a very good case we made for dropping the middle option and forcing people to commit either to liking or agreeing over, just going in the middle. Moving along, let's take a look at one more variation here of scale points. Again, I'll copy this block over. I'll call this scale points. We'll go with all this unbalanced versus unbalanced. And here's our new block. It is down. It's blocks taking up the space. I'll shrink them a little bit. More compact. Okay. Here we have scale points balanced versus unbalanced. Let me first show you the balanced option and then the unbalanced option. So here's the balanced option, the default we'll go with, and then we'll go with here an unbalanced option. So a balanced option is one where the positive and negatives are balanced. As you can see in this option, we have an equal number of disagree items as agree items. So there's sort of like the balance there between those two things. On the other hand, there might be a case we made for having an unbalanced set of scales. Okay. And before I do that, there's a bit of a tangent I'm going to go off on here. It's bothering me a little bit that every time I pull up the preview here, I got to scroll. The reason I've got to scroll is because of the theme that's embedded out here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the theme. It's going to make more space on the screen without the theme. So let me go look and feel out here. And remove the theme. I'll go blank theme. That makes more room for us in our screen, which I like. Back to our question then. Here is a unbalanced scale. Now, unbalanced scale, we one where we are not going to have equal number of agree disagree as oops. Let's create this. So with unbalanced, we're not going to have the same number of agreement items as disagreement items. Let me first read, and then we can discuss or talk about, or I can talk about why one would want to do something like this. So let's see. Let me first make this a 7-item scale. And then what I'm going to do here is I am going to delete 2 of the disagreement item labels or anchors. Here's what we left with them. Okay, so scale points unbalanced. You gotta kind of wonder again. The focus here is the fact that we have options like somewhat disagree, neither agree nor disagree, somewhat agree, agree, and strongly agree. Notice we have more of the agreement and less of the disagreement. Again, balanced is the norm, but there can be a very good case made for why we should use an unbalanced scale. One reason might be that for things that people will tend to agree with, generally speaking, you want to give them more variation on the thing they're going to choose from. So because people might be predisposed to have a positive attitude towards green products, we can give them more options to answer on the agreement side, because if you believe that generally speaking everybody's going to answer on the agree side, give them more alternatives out there. Okay? Therefore, if you have the setup the way it is right now, your responses could be, in this area like this, somebody answering here and here, and like this. Okay? On the other hand, if you give somebody a scale that looked like a balanced scale, some would argue because most people tend to like green products or have positive attitude towards green products, your response would be sort of like all restricted to the space out here. And therefore, your variation is limited to just this area. By giving them more options on the agreement side, the fact that nobody is answering this makes these points kind of redundant. And therefore, we can shift the scale to focus and really explicate how people feel in the area where they're making choices. Okay? And that's the argument for using an unbalanced scale. Okay, so moving along, we're now going to look at, let's look at scale anchors. Specifically, we'll focus here on verbal labels, or numeric labels, or no labels. So let me set this up then by copying this block over. We're going to call these scale anchors. So first first issue we're going to look at here is, I'm sorry, I should have labeled it appropriately. Scale anchors, we'll call the scale anchors. Let's do that. Okay. So within scale anchors, we can now look at our default, which is verbal labels. Sort of like the default for most questions, you typically go with your categories labeled as it is here. Some would argue that, the stuff in the end is all that matters. The stuff in the middle really is not useful. So maybe you can nix this. So let's try that. So first we're going to go and call scale points verbal labels with end anchors only. And so basically we're keeping here the first and last option. So the benefit in Qualtrics is a nice option they have put in place quite recently, where you can simply say show first and last. And for your respondents answering a survey on a mobile device, this might be a better option. It fits in nicely in a narrow screen, in a small screen. So this might be a good option because, again, some would argue that the middle options are kind of obvious, so you don't need to label them. Another option I'm not a fan of, but you could use this one. I haven't seen this done a lot recently. So these are called numerical labels. So we have a regular statement here, please indicate your agreement with each of the following statements on green products. Higher numbers indicate greater agreement. Or high numbers indicate agreement. Small numbers indicate disagreement. Lower numbers indicate disagreement. Okay, so what we can do here is you could literally go in here and label these as 1 through 5. How would you do that? I don't know. I wouldn't, but I've seen this being used. So here it is. We have now the same I like green products and so on with numbers 1 through 5. Now, I said I don't know why you use this, but I know why you'd use this. One reason you'd use this is because you want to save on screen space and you feel like your labels are getting to be really wordy and numbers 1 through 5 are more compact. The second reason for doing this is people believe if you have these numbers out here, they're easy to code. Responses get coded nicely. That is just not true. With the software, it doesn't matter what labels you assign out here. The coding is always going to be 1 through 5 by default by Qualtrics and most survey software. So whether you call this SD, short for strongly disagree, DNASA, it doesn't matter. What you call it up here doesn't matter in terms of the underlying coding by Qualtrics. Okay. So really, numerical labels are not common. Amongst the 3 options, then, the one that I see as being, that I would probably endorse would be the one with verbal labels with end anchors only, especially if you feel like the stuff in the middle is obvious. But if you want to be more clear, you want to be more comprehensive in your description, then you want to put in the full-blown labels out here, strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, and so on. Okay, moving along. The next issue I'm going to touch on here is about statements. And for this part, I'm also going to be using a different kind of scale. So let me create a new block. It's going to be called statements. And we're going to deal with here reverse scoring. Sure. Reverse score. Okay. So for this particular example, I'll use a different scale. This one is one on Store Atmosphere by Dagger and Danaher. Okay, and I'll copy that block and then paste that right in here in a matrix style question. We create a matrix style question here. And I'll paste this in here. Our instruction is going to be pretty much the same as before. So I'll copy that from above. Not what I wanted. Maybe it was what I wanted. Let's one more time. All right, so here we go. We are going to have our reverse scored. Okay. Sorry, some typos I've got up here I want to fix before I go on. I inadvertently, as I was copy pasting stuff, called everything scale points, when in fact the last part was about scale anchors. This is what happened when you copy paste too much. Reverse statements, reverse scored. So regular scored. So here are a set of statements that are all positively phrased. Let's assign our liquor type scales out here, and then we'll see it in preview option. Here we have it. We have here about the atmosphere at the store is pleasing, the store has an appealing atmosphere, and so on. And it's your classic strongly disagree, strongly agree scale. Importantly, all these items, every one of them is positively phrased. It's about something good about the store you're agreeing with. So it's an appealing atmosphere. Level of noise is appropriate. Lighting is appropriate. Music played is appropriate, so on. Okay, so let's see what would happen if you were to modify this to put in some reverse score. Here's the negatively phrased items going in here as well. Here's how we're going to do this. We'll have this one saying, let's just take two arbitrary items, we'll negatively phrase. So let's take the atmosphere. The store is appealing. That's positively phrased. The store does not have an appealing atmosphere. The level of noise of the store is appropriate for the setting. The lighting in the store is not appropriate for the setting. The last one, music played in the store was appropriate. So here we go. Take a look at the options now. Here we are. Here's our statements now. So take a look. The atmosphere in the store is pleasing. The store does not have an appealing atmosphere, and so on and so forth. So if you were to agree to the second statement, so if I was to agree to the second statement, one would expect that I would disagree to the first statement, the third, and if I disagree to the fourth one, chances are I'll probably agree to the fourth. Sorry, if I disagree to the third one, I'll probably agree to the fourth one, and then disagree to the last one. Right. Assuming people have, they're just things that people are. Now, granted, these are different about different issues, but if somebody has a overall positive feeling about the store, they love everything about the store, then they'll probably answer disagree for the first one. That would make them say agree to the second one, and so on and so forth. Right? Hopefully you get the idea as to why somebody would have reverse scored items or negatively phrased items mixed with positively phrased items. So one of the reasons for that is because a lot of people, when they're answering the question, just mark something like this all the way down. So if you have a mix of positively phrased, negatively phrased items, it's going to catch somebody who's simply marking the same answer down the questionnaire. Right? And so that's one reason why you want to mix them up. Second of all, if you have a mix of questions like this, it draws people in. It makes them want to look through the questions more carefully because they know there's a trick out here because this one is phrased differently. It might make them pay more attention. So maybe they'll focus more and quickly mark something different for this one. And so we'll kind of draw them into, again, focus more on the task at hand. So those are reasons why people will have a mix of positive, negatively phrased questions in the questionnaire. Now, the biggest problem I see with this is that, for one thing, not having a mix, having sort of like everything positively or everything negatively phrased, ensures that people, if somebody marks this, you are going to get high reliability in your scales. So having questions with similar answers sort of inflates or makes it more likely you'll have a reliable scale because people are answering similarly to questions that are meant to measure the same thing. If you have a mix of negative and positive phrase, it's stacking the deck against you for reliability. The other thing that some people, I included, have bungled in the past is when you're coding your data, you want to be very cautious to bear in mind that if these were numbers, right? After all, when this is coded, it's coded as a number, typically as follows, 1 through 5. For the scale, the second question, the numbers would be something like this. Hopefully this makes sense. Because the phrasing is opposite, we'll code the answers differently. It's something to keep in mind when you're coding your responses to adjust for negatively phrased items by reverse scoring them. So you might have taken a look at this a few times for this to make sense to you. Okay. All right. So again, which is more popular? Positively phrased is much more popular than is a mixed bag of positively and negatively phrased. As such, I feel positively and negatively phrased items mixed together are going to give you a better, a more true picture of how somebody feels, rather than skewing reliability by having them all phrased the same way. Moving on along, let's look at now statements. I'll copy this whole block down now, and we'll call this here statements force choice. Here we are. As before, I'm going to delete this item, and this is going to be not forced. That's a default in the software. And let's copy this question over. And we make this to be a forced item. And to do that, all we've got to do is, we'll call this not forced, but required, right? This is the terminology used by Qualtrics for a question where you get a prompt. So with this question check, I'm going to hunt on the left for the option to make this required or forced. Here we are. Add requirements, request response. Let's say request, not required. Okay. So here's the difference. Now, if I were to preview this block, here are two sets of questions out here. We have this one that are not forced. If I don't answer this, nothing happens. If I don't answer this second block, here's what happens. I get a prompt saying, answer the question or continue without answering. Right? Let's answer the question. Now let's just say, if I answer the one above, that's fine. I'm still going to get the prompt. So let's go back here. If I answer a few of these, it's still going to be a prompt saying, answer the question. And I can, of course, say continue without answering because I have, in this case, set the option to be required, a request, not forced. If you go with forced as the option, then the respondent will not be able to go ahead until they answer the question. So again, as before, let's talk about the positives and negatives. With a question where you have a required response, it encourages people to respond to every question in the questionnaire, but doesn't compel them to. If they have no opinion about something, they may want to skip it. Sometimes if they're answering a lot of questions, they may not like to be prompted if they accidentally overlooked a response that they didn't question and answer. So in those cases, one would argue that maybe you don't want to harass people by having these forced questions. The flip side is, as a researcher, when you're looking at your data, if you've got questions that have not been answered, they're treated as missing data. If you have too much missing data on any individual, that entire individual's data will have to be tossed out. Based on the manner in which you decide to treat missing values, you may want to toss out the entire data of a person, even if one question has missing data. right? So this ensures by having people requiring them or requesting them respond to a question or forcing them to respond to a question, you ensure you don't have data issues downstream at the analysis stage. Let's go on and look at another kind of issue, another issue of concern. Our next issue is going to be about grouping statements. Let's take a look at how this plays out. So I'll copy this block over again. We'll call the statements grouping. And I'll call statements not grouped. We'll go with one where it's grouped. So a not grouped one is our default one. Let's group it by spacing. And we'll do grouping by headers. So let's copy this over. Okay, so the first one is, this is our default, by the way. This is what we have by default. I'm going to modify this to put in light spacing. So for right now, you see these 5 questions. And as such, with 5 questions, this might not be a great big issue, but if you have 7, 9, 10 questions, one after the other, it can be really a lot to kind of absorb for the human eye. And therefore, it makes sense to group them or chunk them in some form. If you think back to our phone numbers, for years we have learned that our phone numbers are chunked into 212 and then 618 and then 6422 or something like that. So this chunk of 3, 3 and then 4 digits chunked together, it makes remembering the phone number easier. Similarly, in the format in a questionnaire, it makes sense to group or chunk your items together, especially if you have more than 5. I would say group them. In this case, we have we have exactly 5. Nevertheless, you can think about chunking them in some form. One simple way to chunk them is by line spacing. So let's see how that plays out. You can go back down here and select add white space. It's not line spacing, but we'll call it white space. So white space, and here's how it looks within Qualtrics. Notice now between items 3 and 4, there's a little bit of white space. So by default, Qualtrics will create this kind of the spacing between chunks of questions to, again, so people can kind of, it breaks up that view with lots of text by having a bit of white space. That's a good thing, I think. Another way of doing the same thing would be to, instead of using white space, you can have headers being repeated. This is useful, especially if we've got, let's say, 11 or 13 items in one group. So let's say you can add in here repeat headers, or you can do both repeat headers and add white space. The choice is whether you want to have the headers in the middle, bottom, both. I'm going to say just middle, and let's see what this looks like. Here we have our questionnaire, our questions. After 3 questions, you get another set of headers and basically scale anchors, and then it goes on. Okay, so the benefit of this is of chunking is it makes it easier for somebody to see different groups of questions. Even if there isn't natural grouping, it breaks up the monotony by creating this pattern or categories of groups of questions. Okay, let's go on to now examining one more aspect of statements, specifically statement randomization. So let's take a copy of this block over. Okay. So here is an example of statement randomization. Before I'm going to delete the items below. Okay, let's copy this question over. I'll show you statements. Randomization. And then we'll go with one with randomization. Probably wondering what is randomization. Well, okay, so you probably heard about, you probably experienced, listening to things in a certain sequence, and when you're told things in a sequence, we tend to remember things in the beginning and the end the best. This is called a serial position effect, where the place where an item lies in a sequence affects how much attention we pay to it. So in a group of, let's say, 10, 12, 15 questions, the ones in the middle get less attention than the ones at the beginning or the end. To balance out the attention, one could randomize the order of the questions. So that's what is going to happen out here. We're going to, with this question selected, look for statement randomization. Not scale point. Scale point would randomize the disagree, agree scale anchors. We don't want to do that. We want to do statement randomization. And I'll say display answers in a random order. Just off topic a little bit here. You can also decide to show just a certain number of answers if you'd like to, or a certain number of choices. This is handy, especially if you have you've got a lot of questions and you don't want to overwhelm your respondents. You can say, I only want to show them 5 of these 20 questions. So it's a different group of people see a different 5 and so on. This way you get coverage in all your questions without overwhelming a respondent by having them answer too many questions. So here we go. We'll take a look at now how this block looks in a block, so preview block. So here we see the order is atmosphere, then it's about the atmosphere source pleasing. It seems like all along I've made a big mistake here. One of my statements was repeating. I had didn't pay attention to these statements earlier, and I have this store has an appealing atmosphere repeating itself. It's there twice. Maybe not. Huh. Let me go back to the original scale and verify this. So in the original scale, we had atmosphere, the store is appealing, store is an appealing atmosphere. So the author of the scale has the word atmosphere, the first 2 questions about atmosphere, which is fine. Okay. Sometimes I second guess myself. Let's go back to the survey then. So this was the original sequence: atmosphere, the store is pleasing, store has an appealing atmosphere, level of noise, lighting, music. Here we're going to go with appealing atmosphere, noise, lighting, music, then atmosphere again. So the order has been changed, as you can see, and that's something that we intended to do out here. So if I say restart block, that order again changes. Noise is coming up first now, and then you've got lighting and so on. Okay. So this statement randomization is handy if you want to counterbalance any order effects of questions. Okay, the next thing we'll look at here is about layout, and this. Okay, so let me copy the block over. It's going to be called layout. Let me close out this block. Okay, so under layout, we're going to look at here. This was original layout. So I'll just layout Likert. Itemized rating. Right. Many other options to itemize your traditional Likert type scale. The options are you could, instead of this, not thoroughly appropriate, but you could potentially do the following. We can have people answer these questions one by one using graphic slider scales. Let's say we have a thermometer here, or thermometer here, sounds good. And then repeat this for, see here's what the question looks like. So we have people use thermometer here to answer the question as follows, right? And so there's something to be said about having questions like this. Let me demonstrate the issue here by actually painstakingly creating the scale. And I might have primed you by saying painstakingly created the scale, because you'll realize very quickly how painful it is to create these questions. But moreover, the other issue is, you'll see very soon, is about how it looks. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't look bad, it looks good. So then you wonder, what is the issue? Well, the issue is, building a mystery as I'm working on this editing process. The issue is, and I'll let my words drag out here, let the mystery build up as I buy time to create the scale. There it is, ready. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at what the issue is then that I was building a mystery about. So here's the original Likert scale. Okay. So this is like one screen space, right? This is like one screen, you're seeing, in a sense. This is how much space it took. Now, let's look at the cooler questions. I have the same thing now as a graphic slider, but which is, by the way, don't get me wrong, this looks way better than the other option we had, right? However, see how much space is being taken up. It's going to take me maybe a second, maybe even a third screen to get through all of them. Okay, so maybe there's an option around this. Maybe we can have this, slider to the text position on the left instead. That would be better, more compact. Let's try that out. Indeed, that is going to make this a bit more compact, but let's see if that does the job for us. Okay. And on to the last one. Let's take a look at that one also, see how this looks. Put the text to the left, and I'll preview the block. There we go. So it's a bit more compact than before, but even with this, with putting the scale on the left, it's still taking 2 screen spaces in order to get through these 5 questions. So the big downside then about this beautiful graphic slider is the fact that it takes a lot of space. Okay. The last scale I'm going to show you here is very controversial. Don't quote me on this one, because some people would not approve of this method at all. But I think it's worth illustrating because it can be used. So here's our Likert scale. Let me try and move this lower down the list to the bottom. Okay, so let's go to layout. Layout, we're going to call this layout as being hue sort, okay? So we'll change the question format here to pick, group, and rank. And I'm going to now, oops, items got destroyed. Huh. Not what I intended to do here. So let's see what we can do with this. Okay, we'll just go and say disagree. I'll manually modify this. Neither agree nor agree, and then you've got agree in the bottom here. And Then we'll replace these 5 with the items we have. We'll fetch the items from up here. 5 items and store atmosphere. And we have some garbage out here. I'll take garbage out. You can take it out like this, or you can just go to the left and do number of choices. Okay, so here we have the, ouch. I'll kill this one too. Okay. And let's see how this looks. So here's the queue sort option. Our instruction here is going to be please move the item box base on your so a couple of things that are worth noting out here. One of them is that we're not reading questions on a 1 to 5 scale, rather as a 1 to 3 scale now. Also note we only have, we're not reading individual items, rather be dragging and dropping them now. So having this going on here. Kind of complicated, as you can see with the screen space. It's not the best. Okay. So here we have it. I've done the job here. I've moved the items over to the boxes to indicate my agreement or disagreement to the items. Okay. I will say this though, that once you get to the data analysis stage, extracting the scores for every item using this format is much more difficult than with the Likert type question. At least with the survey software Qualtrics, it is much easier to just use a Likert type scale than use this one from a data ingestion perspective. Okay. But so here's that like controversial one, which I said is I don't think a lot of people would want to do a queue sort method for a problem like this, but it can be used. Here's situations. The place where you may want to consider using a queue sort method would be if you have like 40 questions or 50 questions. It can be a little too much to answer, one by one. Having you move stuff into boxes and categorize them in that manner is a lot more, it's a lot easier for the respondent than is to manually rate every single item. So that's one reason why you might want to use a queue sort option. Right? The last thing I have here is really about, it only applies to single item questions. So I don't even know it deserves a fresh block here, but let's just say you have a multiple choice question like this. Please indicate your gender. I'm going to keep it. So here are the options that show up in Qualtrics by default. The beauty is that it automatically populates the gender, it creates these options automatically. So you've got your male, female, non-binary, third gender, prefer not to say. Now, you could either have this vertically, or you can say you want to have this horizontally. That's a layout issue then. So layout issue. So by going horizontal, you are going to save valuable screen real estate, but it may not be pleasing on the eye. Right? So that's one option. Okay. So you can just copy this question over and then have a big layout. Vertical. Versus the layout that's vertical. So here's what they look like. It's in contrast to two, and you can see very clearly how they look different in the actual questionnaire. So, oops, sorry, they look both the same. Excuse me. Look at that. Okay, it's vertical. For some reason, it's not registering my change to vertical. Okay, let's try again. Here are the two options, and you've got the gender categories as horizontal or vertical. And it's a really issue of screen real estate out here and readability, kind of balance the two and figure out which one to go with. Okay, so that wraps up this section. What I've gone over here then to sum up is a couple of issues that relate to itemized rating scales, which by the way is worth kind of spending time on because they're by far the most popular rating scales out there. So first things first, you want to use rating scales that are well established, well studied, well examined. So published scales that have tested reliability and validity are better than scales you create. So it might look like cheating, but copying other stuff that has worked in the past is better than trying to reinvent the wheel. In terms of scale points, you've got to bear in mind if you want to go with 5-point, 7-point, 3-point type scales, questions of odd or even point scales, balanced, unbalanced, another issue to consider. And when it comes to scale anchors, using numerical anchors, verbal anchors, reverse score items, or having mix of positively negatively phrased items or having them all the same kind is another kind of consideration. And furthermore, your statements can be either forced or not forced, not required, that is. You want to find ways to group your items if you've got too many of them. Randomization may be a consideration if you feel like there might be order effects in how people answer your questionnaire. And then there are issues concerning layout of your questions. So do you want to use a traditional Likert type? You can use graphic slider options, which are, take up a lot of screen space, but are visually appealing. Or you can try a more, creative method like a queue sort if you got a large number of items to contend with. There's also considerations of layout. Do you want your information to be horizontally or vertically kind of aligned? And that has implications on screen space and usability. Thank you so much.